Alright guys, welcome back for part 2 of the PVS-69 Gen3 build. Okay, so today I'm going to be going over the Charlie housing, but it's basically the same as the Delta housing with less parts. So this is a Delta. The only difference is it doesn't have this collar on the back. I will be building a Charlie, but the part kit you see here is for the Delta. You have your 11 bolts, 11 nuts, your spring terminal and flat terminal, your DC jack with the nut for it, your 3-position switch and harness. This is the buck converter. I'll just crack this open now. So that's the buck converter, which we'll be using to connect our wires. You have your 100 millimeters of brass tubing, your 4 small O-rings, 2 slightly bigger O-rings, and then 3 small O-rings. So step 1, we need to cut this brass tube. Oh, actually I'm gonna go over the tools as well. For tools, you're gonna need some calipers or a measuring tape. Probably should just use calipers. This is a 4 millimeter Allen head in here, and then you'll need a soldering iron as well. And probably some tweezers. You're gonna need solder and some electrical tape as well. Those are just some of the stuff you need. So basic things for wiring and stuff like that. I recommend having a junk soldering iron for the heat sets, and then having a second good soldering iron. This one isn't super good, but a second good soldering iron for doing the actual wiring, because this one, it's $5 at Harbor Freight. It's gonna get nasty on the end because it's gonna get plastic on it. Or you can buy the special tips, but this one from Harbor Freight is $5, and it's perfect for the M5. I'm not gonna put it on there, but it's literally the perfect size for M5. All right, so let's get into it. First things first, we're gonna cut this brass tubing. I have this is a brake line cutter. And if you're a pleb, what you're gonna do is you're just gonna, chop this or something like that. But if you're a cool guy like me and you have a brake line cutter and a drill, you're gonna first chalk up your tubing in your drill. Don't crank it down because you can actually damage the brass. Then you're gonna chalk up your brake line cutter. I already pre-marked this at 46 millimeters. You're gonna cut 46 millimeter lengths. But yep, I just take the drill, run it, tighten it, boom. Now we have that piece chopped off. And here's our first 46 millimeter section. I debated for a while on just using a 5.56 casing for this, which is why it's so similar in size. However, the 5.56 casing is just slightly bigger than what this is, so it won't actually work if you try and use it. You could probably heat up the casing and press it in to the housing, and it might work then, but otherwise it won't. All right, so we have our second piece. That went down my shorts. Wow. And it was hot. All right, so we have our 2 46 millimeter pieces. And this is just a junk little piece we'll set off to the side. And we're done with our cutter. All right, so now let's prep this harness. So what we're gonna do is, I got some tweezers here. You're gonna look at this harness, and I'm gonna show the camera closer. There's this little square on the outsides of these bottom ones, but on the insides here. And I'm gonna do both these at once. But basically, just push your tweezers in there, and that should press out your lead. And we wanna press 4 of these leads out. I'm not going to edit any of this footage either, so what you see is what happens. So I'm going to press out my blue and green leads. Alright, there's that one. Now the other green one. Alright, so we got our blue and our green leads pressed out. And the reason we do that is to save space, because we don't need all this stuff in there, because it literally just makes it more complicated. So we'll set these aside for now. And we're going to talk about this plug. So this is the DC jack. It fits through the bridge like so, and comes out the front. But we want to make sure that our printer printed this tolerance correctly. So it looks like this one is a little fucking tight. So what I'm just going to do is just scrape inside here and get that cleaned out a little bit. I'm just going to use this razor. You can use like pretty much anything, but just trying to get that hole slightly bigger than what it is now. So that way, because we want this to kind of turn freely, not like super free, but just kind of. Alright, so that's in there now. And it's pretty solid. It's probably not going to turn, but we do want to be able to turn it. So that's in there. I've debated, just like using some epoxy and epoxying this in there. So if that's the way you want to go, definitely just go ahead and do that, because I bet it'll work fine and it'll save you some trouble later on versus using the nut. You know what? Actually, I'm going to epoxy this one in there when we do it, just because that nut is hard as fuck to do. Alright, so for now I'm going to take this out because it doesn't need to be in there. I just wanted to make sure that it was going to fit before we moved on with the next steps. Alright, so we'll set that aside. Now we know that fits. We also just want to check the fitment of everything else. So this is the battery cap. I already know it fits, but it fits, rides smoothly. These are the sensor caps. Those fit. The back plate, we want to make sure this fits. Sometimes this edge tolerance can be a little much, and it'll be a little bit too tight. I found that like if you put it in there, and I just want to show this, it gets this like weird rocking and it's not closing all the way on one side. You probably need to go in here and look, and there's probably like tiny bits of leftover support material. So I print with like those interface layers on my slicer, so there's probably like a little tiny section of support material that got left over. And now that should sit fine. Boom. And like I said, if this gap here is a little too tight, just try and fit something in there, sandpaper, whatever, file it down a little bit to get yourself a nice snug fit here. Alright, so your dovetail, this should slide smoothly. If you bought a parts kit from me, it does. If you printed your own and it doesn't, I have a file set from Harbor Freight, and there's a triangle file, and I just run that triangle file right here and just swipe it through there a couple times and it should fit. It's tighter at the start than it is later on. So once it's in there, it slides smoothly, but to pop all the way out, it's tighter, and to press in, it's a little bit tighter. Make sure your collars fit onto your tubes. It fits. I know it does. I dropped mine. Alright, so your collars fit. We're gonna leave these O-rings alone for now. These, obviously they fit. There's nothing really to them. So what we're gonna go over is the brass inserts right now. So you need 2 brass inserts in the back. These holes are sized pretty darn close to where the insert should start slightly, and then you can heat press it the rest of the way in. To do these heat press inserts, you literally just put your soldering iron in it, and you want to press them as straight as you can, and they'll just sink right in. And once you get close to the end, I stop pressing with the soldering iron and take something flat. You can use like the back of this, or you can use like a chisel, and you just press it to make sure it's mated flush with the rest of the material. I'm gonna grab a chisel because I prefer to do that with the chisel, because the chisel will also suck the heat out of it, and that'll prevent your heat sink from like moving while it's already in the print, just based off its own heat that it retained from the that. So we'll just press these in, and they go pretty fucking easily. And then you put the chisel on there, and that should suck some of that heat out, cool them down enough so where they're not gonna, the heat sinks aren't just gonna move on their own. Boom. So 2 in the back of the bridge and 1 in the top of the bridge. You might notice if you purchased a kit that some of these heat sinks are different sizes, like lengths. The length doesn't really matter as much. It just depends on who had the heat sinks that I needed and how soon they could ship. Oh no. The chisel's too wide for that one. Alright, as long as it fits, that's what we were after. So we did actually come through a little bit on the bottom, so I'm gonna probably squirt some epoxy in this hole when we're done, just because it did come through a little bit. So if you have long ones or short ones, you can tell the difference. Use a short one in the top, because otherwise you'll do what I just did. Just blowing on them to cool them down so they stay where they need to be. All right, so you got your 3 in the bridge. Now each tube takes 4. So I'm gonna go through that and just press all these in. One side of the heat sink is like kind of smooth and the other side is knurled. I do the knurled side on top. I don't know if that's how you're supposed to do it, but that's how I've seen other people do it. And it really is not going to affect it, I don't think. Not a whole lot. So just press these in and you're good to go. Boom. That's one set done, and on to the next. I recommend pressing them one at a time. Don't press like all 4 and then try and finish them off with the chisel, because they might cool down enough to where you can't finish them off. So just do like one at a time. A little bit of wax from something on there. Gets repetitive, but there's only 11, so suck it up. This is quite of a long build process, which is why it's taking me forever to put out a video and why I broke it up into multiple parts. So one thing to note with the tubes as well, that O-ring land that you see on these pods will get a little bit of like pushover plastic into it from when you do these heat sets. So you'll just have to come through with like something and just like clean that little bit of plastic up that's in there. Wait till it cools down a little bit before you do that, because you can actually push the heat sink off to the side, because the plastic's usually still pretty soft. So there's your heat sets. Now we're going to make sure that this dovetail still fits with that one, because it might be poking up slightly. All right, the dovetail still fits, so that's good. Now we're going to move on to the switch. So with the switch, you have a little castle nut, and you have this clamping nut which stops it from moving. You need to take note that on the clamping nut there are small tabs. If you can see those little tabs, and those correlate to the top and bottom of the switch if you're looking at it like this. So the top and the bottom. So this will only go on there that way. All right, and for the next part, we're gonna start well, we can throw the O-rings on real quick. Well, some of them. So these two slightly bigger ones are actually for this area. So you'll need to clean up this ring land for those O-rings, but we're gonna set those aside for now because we're not ready for that. We're gonna take these smaller ones and we're just going to stretch them on and push them all the way down to the bottom. And they should just kind of sit at the bottom. And you do that for each of these small ones. And so I've done some testing with the Charlie, and on the Charlie, they are essentially waterproof. The only issue is FDM prints, like I said in the last video, are porous, so it allows a little bit to seep through the walls, and they require a coating to prevent that seepage. And then the third one goes on the battery cap. We're gonna leave the battery cap off for now, because just gotta crack my back. Oh. All right, so moving on to the next part, we're gonna go over the wiring. So I'm gonna stop and take a short break because I gotta take a dump, and then I'll be right back. All right, guys, we're back. So here's what we're gonna do. So we're getting into the electrical portion now. So you're gonna take your 3-position switch, and looking at it, the white dot we're gonna call the top, right? This is the top surface up here. If you look at the back, on the back, it'll say NC, NO, and C. If you can see that between the terminals. We do not need the NC terminals. So what we're actually gonna do is take some clippers. We're just gonna clip the NC terminals off. Be careful that you don't fucking clip the wrong ones off, because once you clip them, that's it. But this gives us some more room, which we really need inside of the housing. All right, so once we have those off, we have to wire everything up. Previously, my wiring guide said basically to run your external power to your buck and not the internal power to the buck. However, I'm going to be changing that description soon, and I'll be putting out a new wiring diagram. So basically what we're going to do is run our external power and our internal power to the switch, and from the switch, the output of the switch will go to the buck. So we're going to be switching the positive flow. So actually, I'm going to pull one of these red leads out just for a piece of red wire, because I don't feel like cutting off anything else for a piece of red wire. So we got our piece of red wire, which we'll use for the terminal here. And since I don't really feel like soldering and heat shrinking this terminal onto here, I'm just going to use this and solder and heat shrink it directly into the pin. So what we're going to do is solder. Wait a second. All right, let me check on something. I'll be right back. All right, guys, I'm back. So basically, I just want to test something quick, that the two common terminals do not have continuity across each other, so we can safely connect each positive to each terminal without frying anything out. So basically on the one side, we're going to put that red lead, and on the other side, we're going to wire up our other positive. However, we can cut this cable quite short because basically inside the housing it's going to sit like this. So we can cut this one off quite a bit. But we don't want to cut it off all the way. Actually, you know what? Fuck it. Let's just not cut it because we're probably going to fuck up somewhere anyways. I'm going to strip a little bit more of this wire off, and then we can go ahead and solder that piece on. So I need some heat shrink for this. Let me find that quick. Alright, I found some heat shrink. It's probably the right size. We'll see. It fits over that fine. Cut this down. Boom. Ooh, it's slightly too big. What I find is I have heat shrink that's almost the right size, but it's just barely off. If I just put it on some tweezers, and then I just use something to stretch it out a little bit, it doesn't really affect it. So it's still gonna work. It's slightly larger than it was, and now it'll shrink back down and be extra tight. So that fits on there perfectly. That's the one side. We're gonna stretch out the other piece too, just cause. So what I'm doing is I just literally put it on the tweezers, and I just use my chisel to bend the tweezers out. And then we're gonna slide this side on here. Boom. Okay, so shit. I don't have my good soldering iron hooked up. I'll come back when that's done. All right, guys, and we are back. Actually, while I was away, I got a nice delivery in the mail, Amazon. So yeah, we got a nice fat stack of run cams and some more parts I had to restock. 2 of these will actually be for this build, 2 for myself, and 2 for another build. Alright, so we're not going to get into wiring the tubes in this video. This is strictly for wiring the bridge. The tubes will be the third part, and we'll smack it all together. Alright, where did we leave off? Alright, so the soldering iron, we were waiting for that shit to heat up. Feels fucking hot now. I'm going to grab my helping hands and just let him hold on to the switch for me. I love this little guy, he's so cool. And basically what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna heat up and just add a little solder so this doesn't come unhooked. And I don't put a lot on this connector. I don't want to get the connector too hot because I don't want to like melt anything inside the switch. But warm that up a little bit. Where'd my heat shrink go? Got my heat shrink, and we can smack that on. All on the floor. You know what I'm saying? And on the other side, we're going to take our positive connector, and I'm just going to thread all the wires through this little pin. Fuck. Alright, I'm going to strip a lot more casing off. So what I'm going to do is run it through, pull it back, and hook it around. So that way we should have a nice solid connection there. If you're building yours, do this part first, because that it'll probably make it a little bit easier. Alright, I'm just going to twist this up. And I probably don't even need to solder this, but soldering it will give it a better connection, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. So, just a little bit of solder, enough to make it stick. Boom. There we go. Alright, we have a nice clean solder joint there, holding that one on. Our heat shrink on the other side. We're going to take our heat shrink and just slide it over this. And a lot of people use a heat gun. I literally will just use the barrel of the fucking tube, because it gets hot enough to melt your heat shrink on, but not to fucking burn any wires or anything. So we are heat shrinked on there and good to go. Fuck. Remember how I said we were gonna mess something up? We messed something up. Alright. So yeah, we messed something up. Alright. Put the fucking switch. God, how would you do that? Alright. So you would want to feed your positive wire for your connector out through there first, and then solder it on, and then you can push your switch back into the housing. I gotta take this apart because I'm a dumbass. I'm just gonna slide my heat shrink up, and I'm just gonna clip it. It was like that foreshadowing I did at the beginning of the video where I said we're probably gonna mess something up. Boom. I'm gonna melt some of the solder off to get that little chunk of wire to fall out. Remember I said what you see is what you get for this fucking tutorial, so. I've been building quite a few of these sets and I'm still fucking things up constantly. Ooh, that's a terrible noise. Alright, boom, we got that. Where did that fucking connector go? Onto the floor. Alright, that heat shrink, we're just going to throw that away because it was already kind of fucked up. Had a little pinhole in it or something. We're going to grab a new section of heat shrink. We're going to gap it out like we did the other section. So just put it in the chisel or the tweezers, stretch it out with the tweezers, and then we're going to strip off about 1/2 inch of wire. Alright, so here's what you're going to do. You're going to run your positive and negative into the housing. You can run your negative out the back side, but your positive needs to go out the front side. Ooh, I just thought of something else too. So this is the first time I've wired one like this. I think this will be a safer wiring convention, which is why I want to go with it this way. But we need our locking nut on there. How the hell are we going to do this? Alright. Run your plug through the housing. Then insert your castle nut onto the red wire, castle up. Insert your locking washer piece, spikes up. So you should have it set up like this. Now you can go ahead and run your positive wire through the front. So if you look in there, you'll have your spiked nut and your castle nut in there, thread like onto this positive wire already. And we can just pull that out a little bit and give us some space. All right, now we're gonna connect this to the switch. So like we did before, we're just gonna twist this up, and I'm gonna put a little hook in it. And we're just gonna connect it through, twist it tight. Heat shrink, fucking A, I'm the king of forgetting my heat shrink. Don't worry about it, I literally am the king of forgetting heat shrink. If you watch the 69.2 video, you will know, because I forgot my heat shrink half of the fucking video. I literally finished the entire thing and then had to take it all back apart because I forgot heat shrink on like one small piece. All right, so we got our heat shrink on there. We're twisting it up. We got our spacer, or not spacer, our washer and our castle nut. Now we can solder this connection. So I'm just gonna hit it with a little bit of solder. Boom. Slide our heat shrink over. It didn't work. They like soldered it on there crooked. All right. Chalk this guy up here quick and put a little more solder on that. All right, a little bit more solder. Should be on there solid now. Heat shrink is just slightly too small. So we're still gonna go in there, we're just gonna gap it out even more. Oh, I see what's going on. We accidentally soldered the two terminals together. That is something you really don't want to do. That is very bad. Do not solder your terminals together. Boom. All right, so we got our heat shrink on there. Now we're just going to shrink it up a little bit. And we have that set. Okay, so now we can go ahead and these are going to be like our output wires to the buck. All right, so it really doesn't matter if these are matching or different, because they're both going to come off the NO terminal and they're both going to connect to positive in on the buck. So if you look at the buck, there's a positive in, positive out, negative out. These are both going to connect to positive in. So I don't think the buck would actually fit through this hole. So what we do is we solder the buck in on the back side. But for now, we need to connect these green leads. So get a little bit more heat shrink. We'll have to gap these chunks out too, just slightly. Alright, now I need one more section. Boom. So now we can go ahead and chalk our switch up again. And I'm gonna connect both of these. When you connect these to switch, if you leave the open side outwards, it makes it easier to solder and to desolder if needed later on. So like the open side of the terminal, you'll see when you're looking at them. what I'm talking about if you don't understand what I'm saying right now. Connect both terminals before you start soldering, just because you want to make sure that's all going to fit. And yep, drop a little bit of solder here. Oh no. Boom, both terminals are soldered. Now we can go ahead and slap our heat shrink onto these green leads. So one chunk of heat shrink. There we go. The other chunk of heat shrink. All right, this piece needs to be gapped a little bit more. It must have shrunk just sitting here. All right, once that's on there, just go and rub the barrel of the jack or the soldering iron on there a little bit. That'll shrink it up enough to make it stay. All right, when running these through the body, just grab them all together, and you're gonna want to stick them. I'm trying to show the camera, but so you want them all kind of. We can just twist these together because it's not gonna really matter. So we're gonna twist these together, just make it easier. And we're gonna run it up through the body. We're gonna run it through the washer and through the castle nut, and then have these run out through the back. All right, so once we put our switch in there, we wanna make sure this part goes up, and our switch should fit in there like that. And now when we're looking in there, we wanna make sure we not really worry about the castle nut for now. We might be able to move it out of the side, but remember it's stuck on there because that red lead from the jack. But you want to look at that castle nut and see what orientation it's in. Remember I talked about those tabs? So it looks like ours is 90 degrees out of alignment. I can just pull this castle nut up and out for now. All right, so now we can see the tab on there, and we want to get this sucker to sit down on there flush. So it's really kind of a pain in the ass, but you want to like pick up on the one side, but also like push it. It will go eventually. It's just kind of a fucking son of a bitch. So come through the front side maybe, pick up on it, and then through the top, and just push it with your finger. Remember, you got to keep that tab aligned. All right, so we're pretty much there. I'm just gonna push down on the back side of the washer. Once it starts going, it usually goes pretty decently. Sometimes it can help if you push the switch out a little bit and kind of like have the washer ready to go in place against the housing in there. Oh, my washer's spinning. I'm sorry guys, I'm trying to show you, but I'm also trying to do it, you know. My washer spun 90 degrees, so I gotta turn it, but it just, all right, spin the other way then. Keep spinning then. Keep spinning. Boom, all right. So I'm gonna try and have the washer held mostly in place. All right, fucking getting fucked up already. Doesn't help that these are literally the shittiest tweezers in the world. Like, I'm not even kidding. They don't grab anything. So, damn, this is stupid. All right, so I pretty much got it. It's going on there straight-ish. What we want to do is just keep it going on. So I'm gonna spread the tweezers onto either end of the switch and just kind of finagle it on there. It's gonna just have to be something you're gonna have to figure out. And since I pulled my switch out, I gotta push it back in. Make sure it's lined up mostly straight. All right. Use the back side of the tweezer since all right. So once you got that on, then you can go ahead and slide your castle nut down and thread your castle nut on. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. And same thing with the castle nut. It's gonna be kind of hard to fight it to get it onto the back side, but it's actually kind of easier because it's easier to move around than the piece. But you just kind of get in there with your finger and spin the castle nut, and it's pretty easy to thread on. So I just spin it little by little with my finger, and then I'll take a pick. Let me see if I can find one. Yeah. So let me grab a pick quick. If you don't have one, it's fine. You can use the tweezers. All right, so if you take a pick, something like this, and you can come in through the bottom and actually just spin the nut to crank it down. But what you want to pay attention to is that this square is square with the front of the housing, so that your switch still works and that those pins kind of line up. That's just an aesthetic thing mostly, because obviously it'll still work either way, but yeah, and then just spin this nut with the pick like that. Sorry about the fucking shitty angles. All right, that's as much as that's gonna spin. And there you have most of your bridge assembled. Remember, we're going to, for this build, we're gonna epoxy this in. So we can just, fuck, I shouldn't have put that in yet. All right, I'm gonna push that out with the pick then. And when you're building yours, you'll see why cutting those terminals off was like essential for the room that you need in here. All right, so we pop this back out because we're going to epoxy this connection when we actually put it together. All right, so now we have to talk about the buck. All right, so this buck, needs positive and negative input from the internal battery and the external battery. The external battery, when we're talking about it, is this jack here. The internal battery is one that's going to go inside, which we haven't wired up yet. But for the external battery, we're going to go ahead and we're going to strip a little bit. We're going to cut this down a little bit to start. I'm just gonna cut like 1 inch off of it, so I have extra room when I'm actually assembling the whole thing. But this is our external negative wire, this black wire from the jack. You don't need to strip a ton off of here because you literally just put it through the hole and put a little bit of solder on it. But I like to strip a little bit more than I need and then go back and just clip it. So there's only like maybe a few millimeters. We're going to program the buck, not program, but like set it after we wire everything in. So be careful how you clamp this up too. I put a little bit of heat shrink on my clamp so I don't damage anything. But this black wire is going to go to negative in, and I like to run the wires like through the side that has things on it, if that makes sense. Like the side that is bulky, I run the wires through that side, so that way it like doesn't add to the overall dimensions. But so we're gonna go negative in on this side here, and it might be easier if I just clamp the wire. I'm gonna clamp it closer though. So I got the wire clamped up, and you just push it through, and we're gonna take our iron. Where's the solder? And you literally need like almost no solder. You don't need any heat shrink for this, but you take your iron, just a little bit of solder, and make that connection to the board. Trying to make sure that I'm connected. Boom. And so mine's got like quite a bit of a nub on it because I had so much extra wire coming through, but you can snip that off. And oh, look at that shitty ass solder connection. All right, let me strip a little bit more off then. That was a pretty bad solder connection, I guess, because it literally just fell right out. So again, we're gonna go in negative, just clipping off some stragglers. So we're gonna go negative in. Doesn't matter what hole you use, but these holes do have continuity across them. So keep that in mind. Like, you can't short out the two negative in pins, if that makes sense. All right, now, pretty sure we got a good connection. All right, now we have a nice good solder connection, and I'm gonna clip off this extra just to make it down a little bit. All right, and remember these green wires are our positive output from the switch. So our positive outputs from the switch are also going to go into the buck. Just to make things easier, I'm gonna snip off these wires so they're about the same length as what we got going on. So that way we're not like cramming a bunch of extra wire in there. And if you fuck up too many times, these wires are gonna get short on you. Like, it's just gonna happen. So just take your time, go slow, and yeah, good luck on your build, guys. So I'm gonna stick both of them in there, and then I'm just gonna solder them both at the same time. All right, and clamp this up in here. And like I said, it doesn't matter if you cross the continuity on these, because that switch will select which one actually is connected to the battery, like has the completed circuit. So it doesn't matter if there's cross continuity. And those look like good solder joints, so I'm just gonna clip this. And there we go, we have our negative from the buck, and this is our positive in for the internal battery. And we're gonna push this red wire out of our way and through the front of the housing, and we'll deal with that one later. But we're gonna push that out and through the front. Now we can actually go ahead and like program our buck. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna chalk this buck up in my helping hands, and My helping hands is like butchered, by the way, because I've been fucking hammering on it so much. All right, just put them down there, okay? And you want to grab your digital multimeter. So here we have our multimeter, and these leads are so stiff. We're going to set it to 20 volts DC. So 20 volts DC on our multimeter. We're going to grab our battery. I have this battery right here, which directly plugs in, and we should be good to go ahead and plug this sucker in now. One thing you do have to make note of is which side, basically which side the DC plug is on of your switch, and that's your external side. So for us, the DC plug is soldered to this side of the switch and not this side. So turning it this way will turn on our DC power, or our external power. All right, so now we're gonna go ahead and ensure that we do have power down here by just touching these terminals. And so right now we're seeing 7.52 volts from the battery. So we're gonna move to the outside, and we're seeing a fluctuating 6 point whatever volts. It doesn't matter because we have to turn it down anyways. And I'm just gonna grab a Phillips screwdriver head. It's pretty small that it requires, and you have to really do fine-tune measurements with this. So what you want to do is you want to put it on there so you have a connection and you're seeing it. Then gently turn this potentiometer. I have broke a couple of these, so just gently turn it. But if you bought your own parts, you're gonna have plenty of these. If you bought it from me, just hit me up and I can send you a replacement. All right, so this screwdriver is actually too pointy. That Phillips is too sharp for that. So let's see, I don't have a Phillips, I'll fit that then. All right, let me go grab a different screwdriver. Wait, what do we got here? This one should live. All right, so we'll pin it down, see what we got. Drop this in our buck. All right, so I'm gonna set this at 4.8 volts. Keep in mind that we might have to change this later, but 4.8 volts should be safe. But the problem is these run cams require a minimum of 5 volts, and the screens take a maximum of 5 volts. So what we could do is we could jump the positive from here. We could jump this terminal and run that strictly to the cameras if you wanted to, or you can run everything off of this buck. That's up to you. This is the way I'm gonna do it. Unless I run into some further problems, this is the way I'm gonna keep doing it. So now I'm gonna go ahead and unhook our battery so we don't accidentally short anything out, turn the switch back. And we're gonna hook up our rear connection. So I'm just gonna use a section of this blue wire, just cause, actually, this green wire is already cut off, so, well, I'll use blue. Fuck it, I'll use black. You only need like maybe an inch or two, but you're gonna cut off your wire, and I think this wire doesn't like these strippers actually, but okay. So strip a small section off and solder that up to the negative in. Like we did before, we're gonna push it through the side that has all the parts, and I'm gonna grab this in the helping hands, and we're gonna solder this new small section to the negative in. And if you guys bought a soldering kit to do this, and the soldering kit came with one of these, I had no clue what this sucker was for the longest time, but basically if you solder something and you take the wire out and there is solder left in this hole, you heat it up on one side with the soldering iron, you put this to the other side and you press the button and it sucks the solder right out of the fucking hole. I didn't know that, and I was amazed when I found that out, because that was a game changer. Yeah, so I'm gonna clip off that extra, and then I'm gonna go ahead and strip this side as well. Like I said, you only need a little bit stripped off. That was probably like way more than you needed, but you're gonna put this on your spring terminal. Put it in the spring side and kind of fold it down like that. You don't need to heat shrink this because the spring terminal is open anyways. And what we want to do is solder it flat. So we bring this over and we want to make sure that's a nice and like that the wire is flat to the spring terminal. Fuck. So what that's going to do is like basically make it sit flush where it needs to, and then we can come around on the front side as well. And I'm going to just set something heavy on here, really move on us, and I'm just going to throw a little bit more solder on the front side. I know I'm soldering directly on a wood table, but if it starts on fire, I'll fucking blow it out, okay? Alright. So we have that soldered up, stuck a little bit, and should be good to go there. All right, so now we're gonna take our back piece, and this is gonna have to get like epoxied in here, and there's a little channel for that to sit in. The spring terminal doesn't have to be exactly center, but just get it close to center, okay? And you're gonna wanna sit it in there like that and epoxy that in there. So you're also going to need to have some sections of wire. I have this red wire and this black wire. You're gonna need like about a foot for each side. You don't need that much, but it's really good if you have it. It's really handy because if you make mistakes, which you probably will, you can come back and fix it. So what I like to do is I like to just take quite a bit off the spool, and this is some really thin gauge wire. Wouldn't recommend this thinner stuff, just get a little bit thicker because it's got to hold up to some abuse, not a whole lot, but I cut a nice long length, probably like 18 inches or so, maybe a little bit longer than that actually. Cut a nice long length off, and then go ahead and grab our positive, and we're gonna do about the same length. Doesn't have to be exactly the same, but just about the same length. All right, so we can set that to the side for now. Now what we want to do with this is connect our red wire to our positive out, and our black wire to our negative out. And this is going to be the wire that runs down to your tubes. And yeah, so when we do eventually put all this stuff together, you're going to have to cram everything in here. So just like be mindful with the amount of wire you're using, because everything does have to fit in here. I found that it's easier to assemble everything if you take a 18650 or these CR batteries and have them in there while you cram everything in, so that way you're making room for the batteries when they need to be put in eventually. So on the front side, included with the kit is this flat terminal, and I also like to use these like neodymium magnets. Alright guys, like I was saying, the kit comes with that flat terminal piece. Where the fuck did I put it? Where the fuck did that thing go? Alright, what the fuck? I stuck it to something, I know I did. I magnetically stuck it. Oh, there we go. So the kit comes with this flat piece. I like to take one of these small neodymium magnets and stick it on there. And that basically lets it sit on your battery and spin. So when you tighten the cap down, it doesn't have too much friction and it can actually freely spin on there. Otherwise it can like twist up the wire and get all fucked up. So I like to add a little neodymium magnet on that. I don't include those in the kit anymore. I used to, but I don't anymore. So basically what you want to do is not have too much extra wire, but just enough. And we're gonna, yeah, this is probably enough because we want to be able to like tuck the wire in and pull it out and tuck it in. So I'm gonna clip it there, strip it. And same thing we did with the other side. Where the fuck did that thing go? We're gonna come in from like the top. So this button side, we're gonna come in from that button side with the wire, and we want to be able to bend this tab a little bit. So I'm gonna come in there and solder this on just like that. Grab it with the old pinchers. Oh no, it's magnetic, so it's not fucking doing it. I'm gonna take the magnet away for now. So this piece, stick that through. Fucking fuck. Alright, here's what we'll do. So like that. Alright, boom, we got our piece soldered on there, and then we got our magnet. We'll stick our magnet on there, and that way when we put our batteries in, we put this on. Might want to bend that just a little bit more, but not too much because we still need to have a battery in there. But that way when that'll go on there, we can screw the cap on and it'll still work. Alright, so now we need to attach our leads that go out to our tubes. And so remember we cut equal length red and black wire, about 18 to 20 inches. And we're just going to cut that in half. Alright, so cut each piece in half, and then we're going to strip, not a whole lot, just a small amount on each end. An end of each piece, we're going to strip a small amount. Alright, so what we're going to do now is you can feed it through either way. I like to feed this way through the bridge. So basically put the red wire down and just kind of like have it bent to go that direction, and then you should see it in here, and then you can just reach in there with tweezers. Like I said, these tweezers suck dick, so they don't grab onto shit. But reach in there with tweezers and just pull the wire out. And you want to do that with your positive and negative on both sides. So just jam it in there, and then you'll see the wire in there, and then just reach in there and grab it, pull it through. got that side done. Now we'll do the other side. All right, so now we got the ends coming out each side, and we got these here. So we're gonna do, obviously, the blacks to negative out. I'm just gonna twist these up a little bit so I don't have all these frayed ends in there. And slap a little bit of solder on those. Some of this old crappy solder off of this thing. Make sure it's nice and good solder joint on there. We'll snip these ends off, and we'll connect our positive outs. And remember, we already set the buck to 4.8 volts, which should be enough to power the camera. It should be like within tolerance for the camera, but if it doesn't, we'll just have to turn it up slightly to power the camera. Boom, so we have that wired up. Now we can go ahead and make sure everything's gonna fit in there. So keeping our front wire out. I like to just find a way that these will like fold nicely and go in there. There's no like designated shelf for the buck with but yeah, you can just kind of fit everything in there. Try not to like kink anything. You might be able to push the buck off to the side a little bit. All right. And just kind of make sure everything will fit in there and not like impede the battery path too much. It's kind of a fucking mess. The initial design was for the buck to actually fit in here. So if you want to try and epoxy the buck in there, you can, but it actually kind of doesn't really fit. Probably just because of printing tolerances, it doesn't really fit back there. But yeah, so just be mindful with the amount of wire you use. Remember, you still got to epoxy the spring terminal on. I'm going to do that later because then you got this piece stuck to whatever you're doing, and it's just an extra hassle because it's just dangling there. That's going to be it for this video. In the next video, we're going to cut our holes in the brass tube, connect the tips, and wire up our tubes. We're going to smack it all together. Thanks for watching, guys. Like and subscribe, and go follow me on Instagram, TikTok. Join the Discord server if you're not already in there, because we got a lot of guys in there doing cool stuff. Not just my night vision, there's like some other really cool designs in there, and you guys should definitely go check them out. Thanks.